everyone, I'm Karthika and I have just begun my journey in the world of computational neuroscience, and I cannot wait to share my learnings as I make progress in this journey with you all by being a co-creator of this channel, Brainwash Talks. Welcome to the very first video. I'm going to introduce you all to the crazy side of the 3-pound organ that we all have with the help of this book, The Phantoms in the Brain, written very beautifully by Dr. V.S. Ramachandran, who is one of the world's leading brain researchers. This book really altered my perspective of understanding the brain. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to pick a few of my favorite stories, experiments, facts, etc. from this book and share them with you all in my own way. To begin with, I want to read out loud, verbatim, one paragraph from the preface of this book to y'all. So here it goes. The famous saying, "May you live in interesting times," has a special meaning now for those of us who study the brain and human behavior. On the one hand, despite 200 years of research, the most basic questions about the human mind, how do we recognize faces? Why do we cry? Why do we laugh? Why do we dream? And why do we enjoy music and art? Remain unanswered. As does a really big question, what is consciousness? On the other hand, the advent of novel experimental approaches and imaging techniques is sure to transform our understanding of the human brain. What a unique privilege it will be for our generation and our children's to witness what I believe will be the greatest revolution in the history of human race. Understanding ourselves. So impactful, isn't it? This is exactly the reason why even I am drawn to this field. So moving on, now I would like to share a few of my takeaways from the very first chapter of this book, The Phantom Within. That's the name of the chapter. And this was an introductory chapter full of surprises and starts on a very interesting note where the doctor or the author gives a couple of examples of the kind of patients he met with very unusual behavior. Like there was a patient who after stroke got paralyzed on the left side of her body, but she insists that it is perfect and that she's not paralyzed. And if you question her that then whose hand is that which is immovable lying on the bed, then the answer that she'll give you is that, oh, that's my brother's. Another example where there was this patient who developed a large blind spot in her field of vision. So, but what actually happened was that in that blind spot, she could actually see cartoon characters filling in. I mean, that's also weird. Like, if she's talking to someone, she could actually see a Bugs Bunny sitting on the lap of that person. But you know what? These are not crazy people. It's just that some part of their brain is damaged, leading to peculiar behavior. And to me, the best part is when the doctor says that how, with the help of these people, he will try to understand the inner working of the brain that a normal functioning brain will not allow us to study. And why I find this approach very interesting and relatable is because that even at work, at my work, like if I join a new project team and then in my initial days, I'll have to go through all the code that the team has already written and using in the system and everything. So that time, yes, by going through the code and everything, yeah, I get an understanding of how it works, but I get a better understanding only and only if something breaks, and then I go and debug it, and then I understand, oh, this is how it is linked to the other piece of code and all of that. So it's like saying literally you learn from mistakes. Keeping this approach in mind, let's now talk about the simple act of smiling. So this is something that comes to us automatically when we meet someone, right? So, but if you're asked to smile for the camera, then you probably will bring out a very hideous grin, which is different from your natural smile, isn't it? So the answer to this is that it's not actually shyness or embarrassment. It's rather it is that your two smiles in these two different scenarios are handled by different regions in your brain, and only one of them is specialized in the smile circuit. In the first case, when you see a familiar face, the visual image is sent to the emotional center of your brain, which is the limbic system, and that sends a message to the basal ganglia that is actually responsible to orchestrate your facial muscles to produce a spontaneous smile without even you thinking. And on the contrary, when the photographer asks you to smile, you process the information involving your auditory and language centers of the brain that relays the message to your motor cortex that has to now carefully orchestrate dozens of tiny muscles in your face to produce that smile. And as a result, it is forced and stiff. Evidence of these two different smile circuits come from the brain damaged person. So this is the approach we are talking about. So there was this person who suffered a stroke in the right motor cortex, affecting the muscle movement in his left side of the body. Right? So right side of your brain actually controls the left side of your body and vice versa. So yeah, so because of his damage that he suffered in the right motor cortex, his left side was affected, and because of which he produced only half smile. Like he could just smile from half side of his body, half side of his lips, and that produced even more hideous grin. And but the interesting thing is, if he sees a familiar face, he actually can give out that spontaneous smiles as if he had no issues with smiling at all, because his basal ganglia did not suffer the stroke and it was intact. This actually tells us that yes, the two types of smiles are produced by two different regions of the brain, and hence proves the whole idea. I also love how the author makes a comparison with physics and says that currently the field of neuroscience is in the Faraday stage, where experiments were performed to study the behavior of magnets for the very first time. Even though magnet was something that was used for ages, like in compass and all. So, but that was the very first time that Faraday or someone actually sat and tried to understand the behavior of magnet and also made connections between magnetism and electricity with that experiment of that magnet and coil, moving magnet and coil experiment. So all of this was actually qualitative. But it was much later that Maxwell came into picture and formalized it and came up with the electromagnetic wave equation that formed the basis of modern physics, taking the whole experiment that the Faraday had done and everything as his starting point. So the field of neuroscience is yet to see its Maxwell stage. This sounds super exciting to me. Okay, so now let me move on to the next chapter called Knowing Where to Scratch. And before I share the story from this chapter, let me explain what is this that you see on the screen. This is the Penfield map. And in this brain, in this region, central sulcus, behind this is what is the primary somatosensory cortex that is present. And primary somatosensory cortex is actually responsible for bringing out those touch sensations that you feel. And if you see this enlarged view of that area, you can see how the different body parts are structured or placed in that cortex. But you might have thought that this is face and after face is what is neck, but the placement in that cortex is not next to each other. There is hands and finger in between, and then there's also arms and shoulder. That's one thing to note. And the other thing to note is that face compared to the other body parts is actually small, but even then it has a very large area, whereas trunk and leg combined is actually just this much, which is the rest of the body mainly, right? So these are two things to note here in this mapping. And this little man called Homunculus actually just helps you visualize that. Like you can see the face is having a huge area, so the face is large here, even the hands and fingers are large. So this is a funny representation. Okay, so keeping this Penfield map in mind, I want to share the story where there was this person who had a phantom limb. So by phantom limb, what I mean is that because of some issues, the person lost or had to amputate the limb, and that is why he lost the arm. So in real, there is nothing present, okay, but he still had the sensation of like the ghostly sensation of a limb present there, like attached to his body. So that is weird, but that is actually very common, and it happens. So what actually happened was this doctor tried an experiment with this person, and what he did was on his face, that person's face. So he actually tried to stroke his face, different parts of his face. Now, when he was doing it somewhere near the cheek, that person actually told that, "Oh my God, I can also feel a tickle in one. I think it's his thumb or some finger, you know." And then he tried to stroke some other area, and then he could feel the tickle in the other finger. So basically, doctor could really remap or find the whole mapping of his phantom limb on his face. Why? See, you see in this map, face, this area is actually placed next to the hands and finger. That is why he was feeling that touch sensation when it was happening on his face, also like that tickling thing that he was also feeling simultaneously on his phantom hands and finger. And why did this happen? This is because now this area, because he doesn't have that limb anymore, is actually vacated, and because of which these touch sensations from the face nose region actually invaded into this area, and now that is why he could feel it in both places. Isn't that interesting how you're trying to learn things about brain? The third chapter of this book was called Chasing the Phantom. So here, another interesting phenomena associated with the phantom limb, which is the phantom pain, was introduced, and how the doctor actually found a way to relieve the phantom pain was also shared or explained in great detail using the mirror box, which is a very simple idea, but an amazing idea. So you can find the link to a TED Talk in the description below, and that TED Talk is by the doctor himself, where he explains this whole mirror box and phantom pain in very nicely. So rather than listening to me trying to explain that, you should definitely go there and check it out. Okay, so now let's move on to the next chapter, which is also my favorite chapter, and it is named The Zombie in the Brain. So in this chapter, I learned something very useful and interesting. So here I have pulled up another image on the screen. Here is the retina that actually sees everything. And then this communicates what all that information into the visual cortex. But there is a deviation here. So before I talk about that, let me just highlight that there's a point-to-point mapping of the visual field into the visual world that you see into your visual field. So so what happens is, now whatever image falls on your retina, that is then leaving through these optic nerves, all that is communicated, and there are two pathways. So the one pathway that you see, this one is evolutionary or phylogenetically new pathway, but the other one, this pathway is an old pathway. So first let's talk about the new pathway, where the information goes, and this is like the relay station called lateral geniculate nucleus, LGN, and from there it goes to the visual cortex, that is behind your brain. Now, in this visual cortex, what actually happens is the object detection part. So basically, whatever you see, maybe the outlines of that, or the edges and everything, that's what is actually perceived here, and that helps you in detecting the object. But a deeper meaning to that is given when that information is communicated in the how pathway. So in this how pathway, there are around 30 different brain areas that are involved, and and each of them are specialized in doing certain things. Like there's an area named as MT that can actually understand the motions, the motion that you see, like moving thing. Okay. So there was actually a woman who had some damage in that particular region, that MT, that region, which was specialized in detecting the motion. So because she had the damage, what she saw things, like the way she saw things were like, if the car was moving, she couldn't see that moving car. She saw only frames of that car. So that's how it affected her. Otherwise, everything she can see very clearly. She can detect all the objects and everything, but she can't get the sensation of things moving. So that is that. And there's another area which is called, I think, V4, that is specialized in, understanding the colors. This is different from what the color blindness, the rods and cones associated with the retina, that kind, the eye associated with eye, that kind of color blindness is a different color blindness. But this is like from the brain itself, you cannot perceive any sort of color, even if your eyes have the right things available there. So that is so that way there are each and every of those 30 areas are specialized in doing some sort of a task. So that is the how pathway, which basically gives meaning, or describes like the how things are there in the world out there. So that is that. Now, this is the primary visual cortex, which is the new pathway. Now, there's this old pathway. So here, this information goes to the superior colliculus. Now, this superior colliculus is basically just specialized in understanding the orientations of things, and also in scenarios where something very fast, something is coming from the left side, coming towards you, then this superior colliculus gets activated and tells you that look at that side, and then you can look at that side, and then you can do some sort of an action, like maybe grab it, or do like basically do whatever, like do some sort of an action. It's like it invokes your reflex motions. Okay. So that is what the superior colliculus does. And so basically it's, related to the where pathway. So that these are the two pathways, new pathway and old pathway. And now what actually happened was, the story associated with this whole information that I just shared is this, that there was this person who suffered a damage in his right visual cortex. So also, even the way you see, the left side of the world is all mapped to your right visual cortex and vice versa. So it's some sort of a quirky evolutionary thing, but that's how it's all mapped. So because a person suffered a damage in the right visual cortex, he was blind on the left side of his world. So there are two other doctors who performed this experiment with that person. And what they did was, on the blind side, that is the left side, what they did, they placed certain things, like they took a stick and they placed it horizontally. And then they asked that person to tell, just guess that, tell us what is the orientation of this particular stick that we are placing in your left blind side. So that person was just guessing according to him, and he was telling, yeah, it is, I guess it's placed horizontally. Then they placed it vertically. He again told, yeah, it's placed vertically. So they performed this experiment multiple times with different objects, and every single time, according to the person, he was guessing, but he was guessing correctly every single time. And that really surprised both the doctors. And the only plausible logic for this kind of a scenario is that probably, even though he is blind from the new pathway, his old pathway is intact. So the information from the retina is actually going to the superior colliculus, and this is specialized in understanding the orientation. So that is why, without even he knowing, he's actually able to make some sort of a guess of the orientation of that particular object in his left side, which is blind. So they term this phenomena as blind sight, like an oxymoron. Okay. So that is very interesting. And so you know, I really found this very fascinating that even if you do not realize, you can actually sometimes understand the orientation. And also, this invokes another interesting question, that is the consciousness or the things that we perceive, like that kind of a consciousness associated with only the new pathway. So is that some sort of an evolutionary implication? Like, what is the relation that consciousness is like that privilege of consciousness is given only to the new pathway but not to the old pathway? Isn't that interesting? I do not know the answer to that, but it sure is a very interesting question to, you know, um, explore.
What you doing?
I'm attempting to view my work as a fleeting peripheral image so as to engage the superior colliculus of my brain.
Interesting. I usually just have coffee.
So yeah, that's all right. So try to recollect that in the beginning I had mentioned that there was this person who saw cartoon characters filling in his blind spot. So that's actually called the Charles Bonnet Syndrome, which is explained in another chapter of this book. So it turns out that the human visual system has a tendency to make educated guesses based on fragmented and evanescent images dancing in the eyeballs. This can be referred to as filling in. So you know what? I just remembered another incident. One of my friends, she had messaged me on WhatsApp, and I read it just from the notification. So what she had written was, "I'm desperately waiting for something." So I just saw the words VCN, like the letters VCN, and I just suddenly filled it in because I just quickly read it from the notification and I filled it in like maybe she's saying she's desperately waiting for the vaccination, because in the scenario that we're living in, vaccination is something very relevant that we are all waiting for. So that, but then when I read it, actually, like later on, the message she actually meant was vacation. So you know, because both the words have this VC and these few letters common, so I saw my I sort of, my brain sort of filled it in some, just you know, and I read it as vaccination at first. So you know, and I'm sure you might have also come across such incidents, or you know, where you just try to fill things in before you even actually see the actual thing. So that's just an interesting incident that I wanted to share here. Anyway, so the area of retina where the optic nerve exists, the eyeball, that small portion corresponds to your natural blind spot. So everyone has a blind spot. That's a natural blind spot. And the blind spot is also called as scotoma. Okay, so there's a very interesting experiment that the author had shared in this book, and I would actually like to share that with you. And doing this experiment, you will be able to actually understand your own scotoma. So experiment goes like this. You can see the image on the screen, right? So here, what you have to do is close your right eye and look from the left eye onto the plus sign, which is like the diagonally opposite. Okay, so look at the plus sign and slowly move towards the screen, or maybe you can just draw this thing in your sheet of paper and slowly bring that sheet of paper close to your eyes while constantly looking from your left eye to the plus sign, and your right eye is closed. Now what you'll see at certain point is that this on the left side of this image, this pattern which you see is right. So this hole that you see in the pattern gets filled in. You'll see a continuous pattern there instead of this hole. So basically, what happened at that point is that this hollow, this thing fell on your natural blind spot, and because of that, your brain knows to fill things in, right? So it filled it in with these lines. So it's not like an empty thing that you see. It fills in. So that's actually very interesting. You should definitely try out, and it blew my mind as well. Probably Charles Bonnet syndrome could be an extreme case of this visual hallucination or filling in. Now moving on to one last thing that I can share, which is again, remember I had told that there was this lady who denied that she was paralyzed when she was actually paralyzed in real, but she tried her best to deny that. So what actually happened with her is that, like, our brain, it has different coping strategies. Like, the coping strategies of the two hemisphere are fundamentally different from each other. The left hemisphere creates a model or belief system and fits experiences within it. So if something way off happens, it kind of gets confused, but denies it. Like, it will try to deny it at whatever possible level, and it will stick to the original belief system. That's what the left hemisphere does. Whereas the right hemisphere, it plays the devil's advocate, and it tries to find anomalies, and if that exceeds a certain threshold, it knows that it's time to revise the model and develop another belief system from scratch. So in that lady's what brain, what happened was, because she was paralyzed on the left side, that is, like, after having a stroke, she became paralyzed. So before the stroke, she was working normally and she was fine, right? So that was her original belief system. And now after paralysis, she also suffered damage in the right side, right hemisphere, which is why she was not able to revise her belief system, and she just stuck to her old belief system. And that's why she tried her best to even, by saying that, oh, that hand belongs to brother, like anything she'll tell, but she will try to stick to her original belief system. Well, there are so many more things that I could actually share from this book, but there's only so much that I can share in this 30-minute video. But I would highly recommend that you find this book and read it. And I'm really grateful that I got to read this book. Now, I would just like to end by saying that this book made me more observant about my surroundings and how I feel and perceive things. I, in fact, also started maintaining my own little diary with the observations that I make or come across. In fact, the author also told in one of the chapters that, for in truth, we know so little about the brain that even a child's question should be seriously taken or seriously entertained. Also, all the terms like limbic system, thalamus, amygdala, and all these different terms associated with the brain, I sort of got a better understanding of that by reading this book. And most of all, I realized that neuroscience, even though it is complex, can have very simple problem solving approaches. And it is all about making connections from different fields and your past experiences. You can craft your own neuroscience experience. So that's it, folks. I hope you like this video, and please leave any suggestions or questions that you may have in the comment below, and I'll try to answer that. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.